I'm Jill Flessing, and I serve as the chair of the Addiction Counselor Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask that the members of the advisory committee respond to roll call to signify their presence at the open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Denise Seisman.
Here.
Christina Boyd.
Here.
Lisa Carter.
Here.
Chad Jacobs.
Here.
And Michael James. Charity Cosson.
Here.
Dulcinea Rakestraw. And Zenova Williams, who said they were not able to attend. I note the following BSRB staff are also present: David Fye, Leslie Allen. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning the meeting being held remotely.
Okay, thank you, Jill. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@kas.gov. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of COMA are not suspended, so we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On June 28th, 2024, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals that requested notice of the advisory committee meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.kas.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@kas.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may contact the board office by calling 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@kas.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I did check that before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over, I will let you know.
Okay, thank you, David. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. But before we do that, I wanted to welcome Denise Seisman, who is attending her first advisory committee meeting as a public member. So I wanted to say welcome, and I wonder if you could introduce yourself and give us just a little bit of information about you.
Sure, and thank you for the warm welcome. I'm looking forward to serving on this advisory committee as well as the full board. I am Denise Seisman. I'm a resident of Kansas and have been for the past 10 years. Originally come from Michigan. I have a lot of experience in the areas of public health as well as nonprofit executive management, and I currently serve as the executive director for the Kansas chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I come to this work with a lot of personal experience, lived experience, I guess you would call it, and just feel really passionate about helping in whatever ways that I can and whatever ways Kansas can to help with the mental health and substance use addiction concerns and issues and problems here in Kansas. So very much looking forward to serving with you all. And thank you again, Jill, for the warm welcome.
And noted, Seisman. I will
no
endeavor to pronounce that correctly in the future.
Yeah, no worries whatsoever. Okay.
All right. The first thing on the agenda is agenda approval. David sent out emails to everyone with, it should be in your packet, the agenda for today. If someone would make a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay.
I
I'll
second.
second.
Okay. Everyone in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
those opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. David, you said there's no public comment at this time.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. The fourth item on the agenda is review and approval of the minutes from the previous meeting on June 4th, 2024. That also was included in your packet that was emailed to you. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes? And if not, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the June meeting.
I'll second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes from the previous meeting in June, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes from the June meeting have been approved. The next item on the agenda is the executive director's report. David?
All right, thank you, Jill. I'll go over just a couple of operations updates for the BSRB, and then I'll give you some updates from the most recent board meeting, and then some future events going forward. So one item I wanted to talk to you about is, as you're aware, our meetings are broadcast on a YouTube channel. We started doing that back at the beginning of 2001. During the pandemic's early stages, we were not physically able to meet in person, and so as a way to have more secure meetings and also provide better public access to those meetings, we started broadcasting those, and it's really been a tremendous success. Over the years that we've been doing that now, we have gone from having about 10 public attendees over, between all the board meetings and advisory committee meetings over the course of a year, to now we have thousands of people watching the different meetings of the board and the advisory committees. I really want to compliment the board and the advisory committees. You all are putting in a lot of really hard work, and it's nice to be able to kind of put a spotlight on that. And it's also nice to invite members of the public to be able to observe and be educated on these conversations. And then that way, perhaps some of those individuals could become future advisory committee members or future board members. And so I've been talking with students recently, Leslie Allen and I. We present information to groups of students, and that's one thing that we always promote, is that as individuals are preparing to become professionals, outreach is really important. We try to help them make sure that the licensure path is something that they can understand to avoid issues, but also we talk about things like investigations and discipline as a professional, so that they can be aware of the expectations for when they become a licensee, and then also some tools that we can offer on our website as well. And we always talk about the meetings because it's also helpful for people to be aware of future changes that are coming to the statutes or the regulations. So just wanted to let you know about that. As I mentioned, we started that process. We had initially about maybe 20 people watching different meetings. Now for board meetings, we have an average of about 80 people watching some of those meetings, and some of the different meetings have had hundreds of views. I think one of our meetings has had over 1,000 views. So like I said, really applauding the work that you all are doing. It's something nice when I go to different association meetings at the national level. Different states are interested in this. Some of them have started to do it as well. And so it's just a nice way to share information and get it out there. In terms of also talking about outreach, like I mentioned, Leslie and I are talking with different groups of schools in terms of the students. Later this week, we're doing some other outreach efforts. On Thursday, we are having an informational forum for educators. This is something that we started doing last year. It was inspired by past roundtables that the BSRB did many years ago, where we had physically individuals in a room together to kind of share information about some changes in statutes and regulations, and to kind of open it up and hear back from individuals at different schools around the state. But with the prevalence of online schools and the growth of the number of programs, it wasn't real feasible to have that in person, and we thought we could reach more people if we started doing those online. So last year we had about 30 to 35 people. This year we've already heard from about that many who have indicated they would like to attend to that meeting. What we're going to do, it's not an official meeting of the board or the advisory committees, but we're going to do that over Zoom and record it. And then as long as we don't have any technical issues, we will try to upload that to the BSRB YouTube channel afterwards, so people can kind of observe that as well. The following day, on Friday, we're going to have a very similar presentation, but this will be an informational forum for employers. This is something the BSRB had never done before until last year, but we thought this would be a nice way to reach different groups of people who are interested in the work the board is doing and the conversations that are taking place, especially as we look at things like workforce and trying to find solutions to some of these issues we're facing as a state. And so we had tried to reach out to a lot of employers of mental health professionals and licensees that the board oversees. And so last year we had, like I said, about 30 to 35 people for the employer forum. This year we've had over 50 people already ask to attend that meeting. And so we're going to go ahead and have that informational forum on Friday. Similarly, we're going to record it and then see if we can upload that to the BSRB YouTube channel after the fact. And so, and then we went ahead and sent that out to the advisory committee members too. If any of you are interested in attending either of those forums, just let me know. Happy to welcome you to receive that information as well. So, in terms of turning to some updates from recent board meetings, since the last time your advisory committee met, the board met on July 8th, 2024. At that meeting, it was the first meeting after the start of the state fiscal year, and so a few things traditionally happen at that point. One board member did step off the board, and that was public member Jackie Lightcap. And Denise Sisman is the new public member for the board, and she introduced herself. So we're glad to have Denise on the advisory committee and also on the board. Looking forward to working with her more in that capacity. Also, every July board meeting, the board has elections for a new chair and a vice chair. And so Mary Jones has served as chair for the last couple of years, has done a wonderful job, but she's decided to step out of that role to allow other board members to serve. And the board elected Dave Anderson to become the new chair of the board. And Dave has done a wonderful job as vice chair in the past, and looking forward to continuing to work with Dave Anderson in his new role as board chair. Laura Shaughnessy was elected as the vice chair of the board. And like I said, with Dave, Laura Shaughnessy has been a great board member. I'm looking forward to working with her in her new role as vice chair. There were also some appointments to different advisory committees at that last board meeting. Right now, during the summer months, a lot of the advisory committees are having conversations about new members. It's on the agenda for this meeting a little bit later today. And so basically, if you can come up with recommendations for new members, those can be forwarded to the chair of the board. Per the advisory committee policy, the advisory committee has authority to make recommendations, and then the chair of the board has the ultimate authority to appoint members at a board meeting. But a lot of the advisory committees are going through that process. So I want to say maybe about 10 different advisory committee members were appointed for 4 of the advisory committees, and then there's about 3 more that'll have new members coming up at the next time the board meets. A couple other things that happened during that meeting in July. At the board meeting, we had talked about a jurisprudence examination, how some states have that as a requirement for licensure, and a jurisprudence examination is an opportunity for the state to ensure that people becoming licensed are familiar with the specific laws of that state. Some states have it as something they outsource to different companies to put together an examination and either run that themselves, or they provide it and then kind of collect a fee for that process. We saw the value in having that information verified from applicants, but we didn't want to charge a fee to our applicants or licensees, and we didn't want to add a requirement for licensure. And so we were trying to think creatively of how can we approach this, and that's when we came up with the proposal to make it an optional type format, to do it in sort of a 1-hour webinar, one targeted at each of the 7 professions, offer that quarterly, and then incentivize it by offering an hour of continuing education credit for anyone who attends and participates in that process. So we had a chance to provide that information to all the advisory committees. Everyone was supportive. This is not something that we are copying from another state. This is something a bit innovative. So we are trying this out to see if we can take a different approach and really incentivize the concept in learning, and then see if we can get the same results through having a voluntary approach versus making it a requirement. So we do expect to launch that sometime later this year, and I'll have more information as we get closer to that. Sometime in the next few months, you should be seeing an announcement. The board has partnered with a company called CE Broker. CE Broker is a company that some other states have partnered with, and some other licensing boards in the state of Kansas have already reached agreements with. What CE Broker is, it's a private company where licensees can upload their documentation that they have completed continuing education, so that if they are selected for audit, instead of having to send stuff back and forth to the licensing body, the board can just log into that portal, verify that information has been uploaded, and then process the audits very quickly. So there will still be a choice from our licensees whether or not they would like to use CE Broker for that purpose. But I see a lot of benefit both to the licensing agency and also to the applicants to use that. It is a free service. CE Broker does offer some higher tiers that are for a cost, but those are completely optional. For all of our licensees, there would be a free account if they choose to use it. And it's a nice way to kind of make sure that they have a copy of those documents. You don't have to hold on to the paper records. And also, if you are selected for audit, that should go very quickly. So expect something here in the next couple months. In terms of other items, I just wanted to make you all aware, we have a couple of unusual board meetings coming up. Once a year, the board likes to have an all-day planning meeting in person where they talk about items relevant to the legislative agenda for the board and some items that require more in-depth discussion. So what the board decided to do is, instead of having the regular board meeting for September and then have that meeting separately, the board kind of has put those two meetings together. So later this week, the board will have most of its regular business meeting on Sunday, September 29th in Lawrence, Kansas, and the location is posted on the website for the BSRB. That'll be a public meeting. It's open to the public, and it will be from 5:30 until 7:30, and it'll be an opportunity for the board to go through some of the more traditional business items that they deal with every other month. And then the following day, on Monday, September 30th, the board will be going through more of the items that are relevant to the in-depth discussion, looking at the BSRB in terms of sort of the yearly review, and also kind of talking about like long-term plannings and goals and things like that. So it's a good opportunity for the board members to get together. Looking forward to having everybody in the same room and getting that discussion going. Because of the format and having that off-site, we're not able to broadcast that meeting, but like I said, it is open to anyone from the public if they're able to attend. And then we'll provide some updates from that at the next board meeting that follows. And speaking of which, usually the board meets the second Monday every other month. So that would have normally been the second Monday in November for the meeting that follows this. But that would fall on Veterans Day. And so to avoid the issue with the holiday there, we sent around a poll and determined that the best time to meet would be the first Monday of the month in November. So we will have an unusual date for that November board meeting, but I wanted to put it on your radar in case you watch those board meetings or are interested in any items that would be on the agenda. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions.
Someday I will stop doing that. Moving on, old business. Continued discussion of the language of individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling. There is a attachment in your packet that David sent, giving you the actual language. I wonder, David, if you could give the committee members a little bit more information about finding out that this was not only unique to addictions counseling, like we initially had thought.
Yes, and I apologize about that confusion. Initially, we were thinking that, and I can go ahead and share my screen here. I can put a spotlight on some of that language in the statute. But yes, in your packet of material, you should have a copy of KSA 65-66 16. And so the language in that I want to spotlight here is, it basically says nothing in the construction of act shall be construed to A, prevent addiction counseling practice by students or interns or individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling to practice under qualified supervision of a professional recognized or approved by the board in an educational institution or agency, so long as they are designated by titles such as student, trainee, intern, or other titles clearly indicating training status. And so there is some language in the statute that would allow individuals to get some experience as students. And this is not unique to just the addiction counseling profession. There is language for other professions that allow students or interns the ability to get some experience while they are students or interns without actually having a permanent license. The issue was this language that's highlighted where it says, or individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling. And in terms of how we would define what it means when we say individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling, we don't really have a good definition in the statutes or regulations. And so while the term student or intern is much more understandable, for us to be able to provide clarity to individuals who might ask us, or be able to ensure the public is protected by making sure that individuals aren't providing services unless they're authorized to do so. We wanted to bring this to the board and ultimately the advisory committee to weigh in on. In our initial review, we thought this language was specific to the addiction counseling profession, and we did a little bit of research into when the statute was created, to see if there was any specific legislative intent. Didn't find that in the testimony for the committee, but as we continued to review the similar statutes for other professions, we saw that this language was at least in also the marriage and family therapy statute. And so it's not unique to just one profession. This language is here as well. And yet in our conversations, we still don't have a real good understanding of why this language was used or what it was intended to relate to. And so this does still need to be something that can be cleaned up. But I think we wanted to bring it back to the advisory committee to see if you had any further thoughts since the last meeting. If not, we will just have this as an item to be brought back to the board. Ultimately, what the board could do is they could try to remove this language from the statute. Alternatively, one item that might be a little easier to do would be to apply a definition to this in the regulation so that we would have it clearly defined what we mean when we say individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling. So, but we did discuss this in the last advisory committee meeting. I think some individuals are going to review this language and come back with any thoughts. So I thought I might open it up and see if any members of the advisory committee have thoughts about this language or any potential recommendations for the board on this topic.
As I'm reading it again, it makes me think of maybe perhaps someone who might be volunteering at an organization and they might be considering going into counseling. I don't know if that type of a person would fall into that highlighted language, but I'm thinking if we were to take it out, then it really seems to apply only to students or interns, and I don't think that was the intention. I think it was trying to be inclusive of people that were not formally in school. That's how I'm feeling about it right in this moment.
And I know in some other states, there's the ability to practice under someone else's license, but that's really not something that Kansas allows. And there can be some confusion there. So it is tricky. This language does go back several years, and we know it's not unique to the addiction counseling profession. So in terms of what it specifically relates to, we could try to link it to at least certain groups of individuals providing, in certain settings or certain, it does talk here a little bit about in an educational institution or agency, but
Right.
it would be nice to be able to quantify this a little bit better, because we don't want there to be sort of any confusion and then have people potentially out there thinking that they are meeting the requirements in the statutes or regulations when it also could appear that they are practicing without a license or authorization.
I wondered, David, when we talked about this before, way back, like in 2001, you could there was a certification and then you could take classes. And I was doing that to get my certification at that time. I had graduated, had my MSW. I was practicing as an LMSW, but was going for that additional certification. I didn't consider myself a student or an intern at that point because I was working at a community mental health center. And so maybe there might have been something there. And then it also seems like we talked about last time that there might have been something here about peers, but now we have peer specialists and peers kind of listed under different, that's a whole different way of being part of that treatment team that has its own separate kind of regulation and designation. And so I guess I'm just wondering if that was, again, linked to some things that were allowed in the past, but not now.
A good question. Leslie Allen is in the meeting as well, and Leslie's been with the board going back to 1999, I believe. I think this is Leslie's 25th year serving the BSRB. So she's seen a lot of changes going from different time periods. And Leslie, do you have any thoughts or any comments you wanted to weigh in on in terms of seeing some of that change and how it maybe that language might link up to that?
I think possibly that might have been part of it as we were transitioning. There were, all these different ways you could practice, but I believe it's now done. We have temporary, student temporary. Yeah. So I think, yeah, I would agree that's probably part of it.
So is the question date where that needs to be stricken, like that needs to be maybe taken out so that it's not ambiguous? Because we have it so clear in all the other areas. Is that kind of what we're trying to make a decision on for sure here?
If I recall correctly, I think some of this language does appear in the marriage and family therapy statute, but it's not in it's not in all the professions statutes that have, similar descriptions. And I think it's just we don't want there to be confusion, and so I think some of the options would be either recommending removing the language if we're not sure who this would apply to, or if there's a question about that, or alternatively coming up with a definition in the regulation so that we have a better understanding. Because our ultimate goal is we don't want individuals out there providing services unless they're authorized to do so. And so if there is a group that should be covered by this language, it'd be nice to go ahead and kind of clarify that.
Did the marriage and family therapist define it?
No, they have not had a discussion on this yet. And so probably we would have it if there's not a specific recommendation from the advisory committee today, given that it's not just unique to one profession, we would probably refer it to the board and then see if the board wanted to take an approach that would cover the different professions.
I guess when I look at that, David, I also think that this is specific to addiction counselor licensure. So to me, the more clear it can be, and it is pretty straightforward now in Kansas, and if we're allowing students and interns, that makes sense to me. But I don't know that, even if, like you said, Lisa, if somebody's volunteering, I don't know that we want them to say that they're
Right.
an addiction counselor. I do think that muddles the water. So I would be in favor of just striking that,
I would too.
and cleans it up, maybe makes it a little more clear.
I agree.
So are we in a consensus of, I don't want to move forward without asking everybody, because I agree with that it seems like striking it from the statute would clean it up and make it more succinct. Is there anyone who is not in favor of making that recommendation to the board? Okay, David, is that good?
Yeah, and sorry, I should have done this earlier. I stopped sharing my screen so that way we can see all the members clearer, but I didn't hear anybody audibly say that they were opposed to that recommendation. So yeah.
Do we need to make a motion for that, or just?
You could have a motion, or if it's just the consensus of the committee, you can have decisions by consensus as well. So.
Okay. Is there consensus? Does anyone disagree with making that recommendation? Okay, looks good.
Okay. We'll forward that to the board and let them know the recommendation from the advisory committee.
I will be curious what the marriage and family therapists say also, if they have a more specific idea of what that language refers to. Okay, next item on the agenda, discussion on advisory committee membership. You all received via email I believe 19 applications for advisory committee membership. That's a lot of applications. I went through them again last night and wow, it's a lot. My understanding is we could have no new members or as many as 3. Is that correct, David?
That's correct. So the advisory committee policy says that you have the member of the board for that profession on the advisory committee. You have a public member of the board, and then the remaining voting board member or the remaining voting members of the advisory committee. You would have a minimum of, I believe it's either 3 or 4, and then a maximum of 10 non-board members on the advisory committee. And so right now, when you're looking at the non-board members, you have 7 individuals. So you are above the minimum threshold, but I would recommend probably, as long as you see someone that would be a good candidate, recommending at least one, since the messages have been sent out and individuals expressed consensus or interest in being on the advisory committee. But you could add as few as 0. You could add as many as 3. If you added 3, then the advisory committee would be maxed out at 10 non-board members.
This is something I really wanted to get committee members' feedback. I am uncertain how to even approach narrowing this down because it's such a large pool.
And I think I could help with a little direction on
Okay.
that. So in your packet of material, I also included a copy of the advisory committee policy. It's a short document, just a little over 1 page, and it explains the role of the advisory committee, primarily as a body that would consider things that had been deferred to it by the board or review items and make recommendations back to the board on possible changes to statutes, regulations, that kind of thing. It does talk about the structure of the committee and the terms of the advisory committee. All members serve 2 years and can be reappointed for up to 3 additional terms. Under the selection process, there is some language that I always like to highlight during this. It says, in reviewing nominations, the committee should work to ensure there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. And members should provide representation to the levels of licensing for that discipline, and those members should be selected from among public and private practitioners and educators. So there's some general language that talks about a few different factors to be considering when looking at applicants, especially when you have a large pool of applicants. One good approach that I have seen is that some individuals just start talking about who stood out to them the most out of the applicants. And then, when you're looking at a representation geographically across the state, I did try to provide a little information to the advisory committee members in terms of, the city that those individuals are from, or the current advisory committee members where they are located. But yeah, as opposed to going just person by person, especially if you have a large group of people, it's usually better just to kind of see if there is someone who stood out to advisory committee members. And then if that same person stood out to a majority of members, there could just be a natural consensus. And then after you have a discussion about, who stood out to different members of the advisory committee, you could just automatically have a consensus if if everyone seems like there were 3 people that stood out to everybody, that's pretty natural. Or potentially you could have a vote and say, well, we've had good discussion about a lot of people. I think it's time to vote. Would anybody like to nominate someone as a recommended person to be added to the advisory committee? And the advisory committee policy does say that the conversation on members would happen at a public meeting. So that's the right format to have this today. It does say that if there's votes, you can't have secret ballot. And so you can't have, any kind of vote would have to be public. And so it could be hand raised or audible, but there's a lot of open discretion in terms of how you want to go through this process. And I've seen it done both ways. Sometimes for the smaller, some of the advisory committees have a smaller pool of applicants, and maybe there will be 4 people apply for 2 positions. And in that case, maybe you could go through each applicant individually. But with 19 applicants, I think I'd recommend maybe just opening it up to advisory committee members and then seeing who stood out and then some things maybe you noticed about a few people, and then seeing if other members have agreement, or if someone else stood out to them.
David, I have a question.
Mhm.
I'm assuming that in order to be on the committee, you don't have to be a Kansas resident, but you do have to have a Kansas license?
So it's a good question. The advisory committee policy says there's one word, there's one line that creates a little bit of confusion, and the board is scheduled to have a little more conversation on advisory committees in general. But there's a line under the advisory committee policy that says the policies and procedures under which the BSRB board members are expected to operate will also apply to the advisory committee members. But defining that has never really been fully fleshed out. So in the past, the statutes do say that board members have to live in the state of Kansas, but the advisory committee policy does not say that for advisory committees. So advisory committee applicants could live in Kansas, but we have about maybe 30% of our licensees that live outside of the state. And with telehealth and people moving different places during parts of the year, it's possible that someone could have a permanent residence, let's say in Florida, and they spend part of their year in Kansas, part in Florida. So that's not a bar. If they don't live in Kansas, that can be something that you consider, but it doesn't disqualify people. In terms of being licensed, the advisory committee policy also doesn't say that specifically. And there have been times, at least for some of the other advisory committees, that there was someone who was a non-licensee that was, recommended for the advisory committee for other reasons. I think for the behavior analyst advisory committee, sometimes there were other individuals that may not have been licensed as a behavior analyst, but they were associated with a certain group or certain, section of the population, and so they were a member of that group. So you don't necessarily have to be licensed, but that is something that you can weigh in terms of what you think would be helpful in terms of making someone a good advisory committee member.
I ask because I know we have always talked about making sure we have good geographic representation. And at this time, I'm not sure how many Western Kansas people we have, but we did have a few that were from the west side of the state.
Considering the, I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
Oh, you go ahead.
Considering the large number of applicants, I was thinking that we should take David's recommendation of saying whether anyone stood out to us. I agree. I was trying to consider representation from across the state because there's a lot of folks from Topeka and the Lawrence, Kansas City area, but that's where the population centers are also. But what do y'all think?
So I also looked at kind of, yes, population where they're at in Kansas, but there were three that really stuck out to me.
Okay.
That's Jason Grieber, Judy Rooser, also known as Judy Shaben. I don't know if I'm messing up her name. And then Crystal Norman. I know two of them kind of professionally, and they've been around since I've been licensed. And what I also looked at was kind of length of employment, kind of the varieties of, their experiences, all of those things I kind of think all contribute to the advisory committee. The more skill sets you have, or just kind of experiences with different professions as far as like mental health or addictions counseling, or even what else? Just the different, like Crystal's was something that stuck out to me on her. She's the executive director of Valley Hope and has been for quite some time, but she also had some experience with criminal justice. I think Judy did as well. And so I just think it's different perspectives on some different topics that I think could be beneficial.
I kind of took that approach too, Charity. Actually, Norman was one of my top 3 out of my top 6. Griever was also in my top 3. And I also liked Meisenberg, if I'm saying that right, because of the different disciplines in the career. So just more food for thought.
And I had Jason on my list, Crystal. Those two that you've said, those were similar. I know, when we talked about having individuals, I think sometimes I actually saw Salina and Wichita, Mulvane, that was kind of far west, I think, that I saw actually. But I also think looking at those maybe individuals that live in a rural area, to me, that also is a representation that they may not live in Colby or, out in the western part of the state. I mean, I'm in Dodge City, so we have that. But also recognizing maybe looking at that diversity of experience of those that are living in maybe not in the western part of the state, but at least in a rural area. So I know I had noted Allison was in Hillsboro. She was another one that was on my list, but Jason and Crystal definitely stood out to me again for those that have been mentioned already.
What was Crystal's last name?
Norman.
So she's Valley
Yeah.
Hope. She's yeah. So I think, like I was saying, I was just trying to look at the ones that had already been mentioned. I also saw that, so Allison was in Hillsboro. I know we have already said Wichita in that area, but Diane and Wichita was another one that I had on kind of my top list. Sorry, I wrote first names. You all had last names, so this is a little confusing. So let me see if I can bring that up. I had them all up here just a second ago. Well,
I was a little confused by Crystal's resume of where she is.
so well, it's Valley Hope. So Valley Hope is in several locations, but
Yeah,
yeah, I'm not sure either.
okay. It just says, and I understand Valley Hope's all several places. It just says Kansas Central Market.
Yeah, it doesn't really say where she resides, but
She's got a 316 area code, but I know that's
Yeah,
not
which is
what that could have
west.
been.
I mean, I think this is something just to take into account. Providers that are in rural areas that are maybe even again in Western Kansas, we have such a disparity in the workforce that I think it's hard sometimes for people to think about adding one more thing to their plate. And so, I mean, to me, that just made sense that maybe we didn't get a lot of people applying because it's hard to commit to one more thing when they're already, you've got 150 people on your caseload or whatever already.
Yeah.
So I think, again, being from in a rural area, being in Western Kansas, I completely appreciate that being acknowledged and Dave, that being talked about. I also know the reality of the situation in that we may, it may just be that we have individuals that are, maybe have some more flexibility in their time and schedule to be able to commit to the time of being on this committee, and that may be something to think about as this committee moves forward. If we have other positions open up, about how we market that, I think you did obviously we did a great job. We had however many people apply, or that was amazing. And I think in my own mind about are there ways to maybe let people know, like, again, that it's online. I think that was mentioned. That's a reason I can participate. If this meeting was happening in Topeka every time we meet, it would be a lot harder for me to fit that in. So I guess I say that because I do think also that we have some really good individuals that have experience and knowledge and can bring a lot to this committee, and they may or may not live out in somewhere different. And that maybe, that we may have to just consider that as part of the equation. I think I'm just rambling, so I'll let someone
You're
else.
making a good point, though.
it is a very good point. And I live in rural Kansas and it is difficult. It's hard to find employees just even as like monitors, but any licensed help is difficult. And so that that's kind of also, I agree, why I looked more at kind of experience and kind of just different things that someone can bring to the table instead of just location, just because sometimes that's a more difficult factor.
Would it be leaping too far ahead? Because I don't want to do that. Knowing what we have the potential to fill. Would we be willing to recommend Norman and Jason? Norman and Griever, last names, first names.
Chad, you didn't get to put out there who you thought who you'd recommend. Who?
Were you saying that to me?
No, I think I got somebody's name wrong.
Okay.
Hang on one second.
And Denise, I know that you are new to the advisory committee and it may have been a little overwhelming. I know you've been asked to step into multiple advisory committees and appreciate that. So if you do have any thoughts, feel free to share them in this process. You offer a different perspective being a public member and also being a board member. So if you do have thoughts, feel free to share them as part of the discussion too.
Okay, thank you.
Chad Jacobs, did I get your name right? Do you have thoughts? Okay. I was like, I thought that man's name was Chad.
The few that stuck out to me was Judy Reeser. I've had a chance to work with her. And then Jason Griever. But then I also John Fleeker. What stood out to me with him is he was actually on the Marriage and Family Advisory Committee. And I thought that would be something too for us, maybe to have some influence from someone that served on that committee.
I noticed that too, Chad, that he was serving on another committee. I don't
Was
know.
that, what was the
Silver
name on
Tongue.
that? I'm sorry.
First name's John.
Yeah, Fleeker, I think.
Okay.
John Fleeker, he had been serving, I believe, on the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee, and he just reached his maximum length of service. So he actually had to come off of that advisory committee at the end of June.
Okay. I had a note about that too, so.
Chad, who was the other person you said?
Oh, Judy Reeser. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name right.
Okay. First name Judy.
Yes.
Yeah, that's who I was talking about too, the Judy Rooser.
Right. Okay. I had two that really stuck out. Jason Griever and then Allison Crable, but now I realize that they're both in Newton. So that might be duplicative.
I think, is Allison in Hillsborough? Like, let's help. I mean, it's right there. It's adjacent, but I think, because I had Allison written down as well.
Her resume says Newton, but
Does it say Newton? Okay, I don't know
Yeah.
where I got Hillsborough then. Sorry.
I also looked at Judy Roycer. I don't know how she says her last name. And Crystal Norman. I was just confused about where she was at.
So it sounds like several people identified Norman as well, right? In addition to Jason.
Yeah. Norman. Yes. 5 people mentioned Norman. It looks like everyone mentioned Jason Griever.
2 mentioned Judy.
And Judy. Yeah.
For practical purposes, is it helpful to have an odd number of members, or does it not matter?
So if the advisory committee members, if we're struggling to have quorum, it can be helpful to have an odd number of members. Usually it doesn't come into play, so it makes a little bit of a difference, but not a significant difference.
Okay. And we have 7 right now?
So there's 7 non-board members. So with the 2 board members, there's 9 members of the advisory committee.
Okay.
So there could be as many as 3 non-board members added. And just to let you know too, this might be helpful. I was looking in terms of individuals that would need to come off the advisory committee in terms of the future. So right now we have Dulcinea Rakestraw. She's in her 4th term. That term will end at the end of June 2026. We have 4 other members who are in their 3rd term. And I guess we have 3 other members who are in their 3rd term. And 2 of those that term will end in June of 2025. And then 1 that will end in June of 2026. So probably in a couple of years, one other person will just naturally need to come off the advisory committee. And then, if anyone were to just choose to step down, that would also open up spots in the future as well. That does happen sometimes.
Okay.
And I think just Denise, just some background. Last time we talked about this, we'd also talked about having as much representation as we can, just having as many people kind of in, being able to input into the conversations is helpful. Also, I don't know, David, you could tell us like the meetings that we have where everyone's able to attend. It always seems like, we have a little bit of just naturally people have things that come in conflict with meetings or come up. And so having that higher number kind of allows us to have quorum and not get into situations where we can't vote on things.
Yeah, and that is true. You do have situations sometimes where someone is under the weather. Emergencies also do come up, and sometimes just given the client that you all are working with, sometimes emergency situations happen because of the style of work that is being done, and that's very understandable. And so I think it is helpful to have a lot of different viewpoints and good discussions. It always helps have more robust recommendations, in my opinion, that the advisory committee can forward to the board. So that's just kind of my thought on that.
Okay. So I agreed with Christina about as much representation as possible. So it sounds like, what do we think about making a recommendation for three applicants to the board president for appointment? Is that how that goes, David?
Yeah, it's ultimately what you'd be doing right now would be to make a recommendation that the following individuals would be added to the advisory committee.
Okay.
And so you could take them together, or you could take them one at a time. You could ask, it sounds like there's been a lot of discussion about this particular person. Is it the advisory committee's recommendation that this person should be added to the advisory committee? And then, or you could say, these people have been all discussed. It seems like these ones stood out, and you can do them together. So it kind of just depends on how you want to do it.
I agree. I think 3 would be beneficial. I agree with everything that you guys have said. I think the more we have would be better. That way, when somebody isn't able to attend, somebody else might be. And I think we all kind of agree on, a good amount of the 3 that we should choose. So that's hopeful.
It sounds to me like Jason Griever is a solid recommendation from everybody.
Agreed.
Okay. So David, is this something we need to take a vote on?
You could take a vote, or you could just say, is there any, why don't we go ahead and take a vote? That way it's always cleaner for the people that are helping us with the minute.
Okay. So to recommend Jason Griever for recommendation to be a member of the advisory committee. May I get a motion to approve him as a recommended member?
I'll motion
So-
to approve.
I second.
Everyone, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
All in favor?
Everyone who approves, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, same sign. Okay, so Jason Griever is approved for recommendation to be a member. So that's one person.
May I make a motion to recommend Norman as a new board member, advisory committee member?
I'll second.
Okay,
And just
all
for our,
the
just for our person taking minutes, so that would be Crystal
Norman.
Correct, last name Norman.
All those in favor of recommending Crystal Norman for membership on the advisory committee, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Okay, Crystal Norman. Cool. That's two. Is there one more motion to approve a candidate?
I'll motion to approve Judy Rooser.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving Judy Rooser to be recommended for the advisory committee, say aye.
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 Those opposed,
Aye.
same. Oh, sorry. Those opposed, same sign. Okay, Judy Rooser is also approved. Yay.
Wow.
Yeah, that was exciting.
Good work, everyone. Just to let you know the next step in the process. So what I generally do is I draft a letter that summarizes the work of the advisory committee in terms that you open it up for applicants, that you received 19 individuals who expressed interest in being part of the advisory committee. You reviewed the applicant materials, you made recommendations, and then I will forward, I'll have the chair of the committee review that draft letter. And if she approves for it to be a nice record of the work of the advisory committee, we will send that to the chair of the board, and then he has the opportunity to ask questions or collect additional information. If no other information is needed, then those individuals could be appointed at the next board meeting.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I thought that was going to be more challenging than it was. Last item under old business, continued discussion on a questionnaire for addiction counseling licenses. I know the social workers have done this. They sent out a questionnaire to all licensed social workers in Kansas in the last year, and I believe other disciplines are looking into doing this. I'm not sure if they have done it yet.
We have not put out the surveys yet for the other professions. However, in working through this with the advisory committees, we've come up with a pretty good list of questions between the different professions. And so I thought what I might do here is just kind of share what the master's level psychologist had put together. Just kind of walk through those questions to see if those look like good questions for a survey of addiction counselors. And we would probably release the survey to different groups of licensees, like LACs separately from master's level, separately from clinical, because there might be some questions that are more relevant to people providing supervision or other individuals receiving supervision. But I'll go ahead and share my screen here, and we can just take a couple minutes just looking at these questions. And if these look good, there would be some, modifications for your profession. And if there's some that didn't include on here, there's also an opportunity for us to make adjustments to add questions, but that might be a nice starting place for this discussion. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And I'm using the master's level psychologist, the list of questions that I had worked on with their committee. But basically it would, this would be sent through SurveyMonkey. So everyone would have these in that format. And one thing that would be at the very beginning would be sort of a short explanation that this was a survey being sent from the BSRB. It's an optional short survey. It is for people who have a permanent license, and it's for the purpose of the advisory committee collecting information to possibly make recommendations to the board on future changes to the statutes or regulations for the profession. And then an estimated time for the survey. There are going to be some open field questions, so people could take longer, but that's kind of up to them if they want to really provide a lot of information on some of these questions. But it would start off with some demographic questions. And keep in mind, all these are framed under psychology, but essentially we would flip that terminology and have it apply to addiction counseling. But the question here about what county or counties you practice, that's a nice way for us to ensure that we have good representation across the state. Also, if we have individuals who are licensed out of state, that's kind of a key indicator too. We see some of the counties we don't recognize, so it's a nice way to look at the representation of the individuals who completed the survey. And then also, do you practice in a predominantly urban area, rural area, or frontier area? Other groups said there might be it might be beneficial to define the difference between rural and frontier areas. So we would include sort of a short definition there of the two groups. And knowing that there are going to be some individuals that practice in multiple areas, but trying to get a sense in terms of the one that's the primary area that they work in. The next question, do you primarily work in public practice, private practice, education, or another area? Also trying to get an idea of individuals working in different fields across the state. Question 3, what is the highest level of permanent license you've obtained in Kansas for the addiction counseling profession? So that would list the LAC license, the LMAC, and also the clinical addiction counseling license. And then question 4, how many years have you practiced in the addiction counseling profession? And I know that addiction counseling is a little bit different because some individuals probably have been practicing addiction counseling before licensure was in Kansas. And so we might have to adjust that question a little bit. Instead of focusing primarily on the license, maybe we'll tweak that a little bit. But that would give us an idea as far as a sampling too, to see if we have people primarily responding to the survey who are recent licensees or individuals who have practiced addiction counseling for a number of years. And then question 5, including your license in Kansas, how many permanent licenses do you currently hold in addiction counseling combined between all states? And I know that's a little bit tricky because, again, not all states have licensure for addiction counseling. Some have certification or other way of, and maybe not all states are going to call it addiction counseling. There may be some other terminology. So we would have to adjust that. But essentially what that question is trying to get at, right now, there has been some efforts to have multi-state compacts as a way to help with, licensee mobility, and then also with client mobility to be able to provide service and continuation of care. And so knowing how many different licenses someone would have in addiction counseling, not just in Kansas, but in other states, that might give us sort of some starting information to see, is this an area too that we could potentially focus on in the future, and to have it set up so that someone wouldn't have to have, 5, 6, 7 or more licenses across the different states, that it might be really beneficial to focus on this area so they could have potentially like a multi-state license or something like that. But like I said, starting information, but trying to collect information to get a better understanding of our licensees. Question 6, how many years have you held a license in Kansas? And again, that might be more specific to how many years have you practiced addiction counseling in Kansas. Question 7, so this is for individuals who have held a license for at least 2 years. What this was used for some of the other professions is for individuals who are trying to move from a non-clinical license to a clinical license. And we have noticed there are some individuals, let's say for marriage and family therapy or professional counseling, that hold a non-clinical license and they're not moving to the clinical license for one reason or another. And we're trying to get a better understanding of why that is occurring. And so for this, it would probably questions that would be focused at people with an LMAC, and to see, are they attaining the 3,000 hours to move to the clinical level of addiction counseling license, or are they not? And if they're not, we would like to get a better understanding of why they're not moving to the clinical level of licensing. Question number 8, in a traditional month, what percentage of your work involves direct services to clients? We have been focusing on workforce in some different areas recently and trying to quantify workforce. Licensing is definitely a part of the equation, but it's not perfect. For example, some people hold more than one license. And so if we just looked at all licenses, we know that's not equivalent to a 40-hour per week person. We also know that some people may split their time between different types of work. And so some people may have more administrative functions. And so we did want to collect information about direct services people are providing, but we also think it's probably appropriate for us to define direct services because people may not all define that the same way. We can't expect someone to spend 40 hours of their week if they work a 40-hour week with clients that entire time. You know, there would need to be time for paperwork and other functions. So, but this is going to be helpful to get a better understanding of, you know, we have this many licensees, but this percentage provide direct services, and then what do the other percentages, you know, it kind of gives the more of a snapshot of our licensees and how that relates to workforce. Question number 9, there's no multi-state compact for addiction counseling, but if one was created, which would have the same model that social workers use, where you would pay more for a multi-state license, would you be interested in obtaining a multi-state license under such a compact? And we talked a little bit about some of that wording. I think the way this is phrased is a little bit different than probably how we would want to ask it during the survey. We would probably just want to say, if they had a format where you would pay more for a multi-state license, would you be interested in moving to a multi-state license, and then have an open field and then say yes or no, or if not, explain why you wouldn't want to move to a multi-state license. And maybe some people are not practicing, or maybe some people just want to practice in Kansas, but it'd be helpful to know level of interest for a possible multi-state license. And then we get to some questions concerning observation of work. And question 10, over the past 2 years, based on your observations and experience practicing in this profession in Kansas, could you share information on any practice-related issues you have seen, such as areas where practitioners appear to need more continuing education or training in a certain area? And this question is trying to help collect information to drive some of the work of the advisory committee. If we can use it as a tool to gain information from licensees, this could be a good source of something the advisory committees could work on in the future. Question 11, over the past 2 years, have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? Question 12, do you currently provide clinical supervision? If you do not provide supervision, could you share why you do not provide supervision? We know for some of the other professions, we have board-approved supervisors for professional counseling and marriage and family therapy. For some of the other professions, supervision is limited to just people of a certain profession. So there are other people that are eligible to provide supervision that are not, and it might be helpful for us to know some reasons why someone with a clinical license may not be providing clinical supervision. Question 12.1, if you provide clinical level supervision, what issues have you experienced or observed while providing supervision? Question 12.2, if you're receiving clinical supervision, what issues have you experienced or observed while receiving supervision? So we want to kind of hear from it from both perspectives, the supervisors and the people that are receiving the supervision. Question 13, to assist the work of the board, the BSRB has 7 standing subcommittees called advisory committees, which are largely composed of licensees in each of the 7 professions regulated by the board. The advisory committees discuss topics relevant to the work of the board and make recommendations to the board on potential changes to statutes and regulations governing the profession. On the scale of 1 to 4, how familiar are you with the work of the advisory committee? And like I mentioned, the advisory committees are all doing a lot of work discussing topics, but we thought it might be helpful to kind of put a spotlight on that the advisory committees do exist and make licensees aware of that, so that perhaps they might be interested in serving on the advisory committees in the future, or at least following the work of the advisory committees. Question 14, do you currently use artificial intelligence in your practice? If you do, in what areas do you use artificial intelligence? This is a topic the board has asked the advisory committees to discuss and weigh in on. And so I thought it might be helpful to collect information from licensees out in the field that are already using artificial intelligence and how they're using it. And then question 15 is kind of a catch-all. Do you have any other comments or feedback you think would be helpful for members of the advisory committee to receive when evaluating possible changes to the statutes and regulations for the profession? And if there wasn't an opportunity for someone to provide feedback during the other questions, that might be an opportunity for them to kind of mention anything where if there was an item of concern, they thought this could be something the advisory committee could have discussion on or focus on or make recommendations to the board, they could do that under question 15. So knowing that, you know, some of these questions are going to be more applicable to individuals with a clinical license, some are more applicable to individuals with, you know, a license below the clinical level. And there's going to be some obvious adjustments based on addiction counseling versus psychology. Do you have any thoughts or comments on these questions or any questions we didn't ask as part of this template that potentially we could add to a survey of addiction counselors?
I'm wondering on question 14 if we maybe need to define or provide examples of what the AI, what we mean by that. And the only reason I say this is I just had a discussion the other day with a colleague, and she was talking about how her staff was defining AI, and it came up as a result of the discussion about software that captures your notes, basically a transcription software, right? Versus actual AI, kind of the differences of some of that. So I don't know if that's important to do or not, but.
That's a very good point. There is a difference of understanding in terms of what AI is. So that's a very good point. Yeah.
There's generative and something else.
Yeah, that was the feedback I would have too, to have more clarification on question 14.
Those are very good comments.
So I don't know if this is just on my brain, I think, just because I've had so many recent conversations about it, but I'm wondering if it'd be helpful if you, David, on the part about clinical supervision, we asked several questions there. And maybe this is, again, a topic that we just need to talk about as an advisory group, but I don't know if it's ever been considered or if it would be helpful to have, like other states have a list of individuals that can provide clinical supervision that's the state keeps, that you know, when you renew your license, you just indicate, yes, I'm willing to do that or able to do that. And then when people need it, they have somewhere to go, because I have been approached so often, not just with addictions counseling, but also on the social work side, but just having some sort of a list. And I don't know if that's just my perspective, if other people are experiencing that, but it's very hard for people to find supervisors right now if it's not being offered at their agency. And so they don't even, like, where do you even go to look for that? And I don't know if that's something even that the board could and that maybe that needs to be answered first. David, is that even something the board could do? And it would, and then that maybe as a question, would that be helpful to have that, or is there a need for that?
As someone with an LMAC who would love to be LCAC, yes, I think that is a barrier. And also, like, for me, being in rural Kansas, being able, I just need more clarification on kind of like, does it have to be in person? How many? And so I think I just haven't had the time to look into it. And I don't know if that's something that other licensed professionals are facing as well, because I don't have time to drive to Wichita every however often. And so, but also, yes, not knowing who would be willing to supervise to get my LCAC. So I agree, Christina.
And Charity, I think again, just with we've made provisions around telehealth or the provision of supervision through televideo, the face-to-face clarification versus, the other. And so recognizing that it does open up the ability for people to have maybe more choice in who their supervisor is, but also that supervisor could be somewhere else, in and not in close proximity. Whereas before, if it had to be in person, you kind of knew who was in your town. But where we've kind of opened that up because of workforce issues and the level of clarity and the research and the support that says, it can be just as productive through telehealth as it is in person. Anyway, we don't have to belabor that at all, but and David, is that a possibility? I guess I would just wonder, is that something the board has the capacity or could do?
We've started to talk about that. So
Okay.
for the two professions that have board-approved supervisors, there's a process by which people, go through that to become a board-approved supervisor. So we have a set list of those individuals. And one thing that was helpful, we were hearing from people they were having trouble finding supervisors for those professions, and professional counseling specifically. But being able to have that list of board-approved supervisors, we could reach out to that list to ask people, are you still interested, or do you have availability to take on more people? And I think there's about 200 people on that list, and about 100 of them responded back that said, yes, we are still open to taking more people to provide supervision. So for those two professions, we have a pretty good way of coming up with a list. For the ones that don't have board-approved supervisors, we have a general sense of people who are eligible to provide supervision, but we don't have a real good way of having a list. But your comments are really the really good comments, because we do know that there are some people who are having some trouble finding a person to provide supervision. And even if there's a big group of people that are out there, I think we could probably do something to help connect people with that. And maybe it's something as far as asking a question on a renewal application, say, would you be willing to be listed as someone to provide supervision? And then that way we could maybe put that list on the website, or at least have that available if people reach out to us. And so we've started to have that conversation, but we don't really have a good plan yet for that.
Okay, I just didn't want to offer that and have it a question if it wasn't possible. And I also don't want to put undue administrative time burden on all of you, but if it seems like there could be a reasonable way to keep some sort of a list, I do think it would be. Just this last week, somebody was talking to me about it, and this continues to be a conversation. It seems like I get calls all the time, so I would be in favor of having a question just to support. Again, is this an issue that we need to spend the time to develop? If we get a resounding yes, then that may precipitate us having more conversation and trying to figure that out, how that could work. Other thoughts? I don't want to be the only voice on this. And Charity, I know you already spoke, but other thoughts.
No, good comments and good thoughts. This is a good opportunity for us to kind of hear from licensees on a lot of these topics.
Okay. So, forgive me, where do we go from here regarding this? I mean, it sounds like folks think that this is a good idea. They have some additions to questions, and Christine and I agree about supervisors having a list, and people often not knowing where to go, who to approach. So what's the next step?
Yeah, and maybe we could start with just adding a question to the survey that says, would you be willing to be listed as someone who would provide clinical supervision? And then that would give us, if we got an overwhelming result to the survey that seems like the licensees are supportive of it, and we could talk to the board about maybe adding a question on the renewal application and start building the list that way.
Okay. So would we as a committee need to review a questionnaire specific to addictions counseling before something like that was sent out to licensees? Or is this, this sort of template written for addictions counselors kind of good enough for our review, or not, that we wouldn't have to review it again?
That's kind of up to you all. If these questions look good, I'm comfortable with cleaning them up and kind of making them more targeted for the addiction counseling profession. And I feel comfortable doing that and then sending it out. If you would like to have me bring that back so you could review it with more specific language to addiction counseling, I could do that as an alternative. So it just kind of depends on what you'd like.
I think cleaned up with, the language looks good. It's a good questionnaire. I trust that you would do a good job, David.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I do think, trying to get individuals who are busy, like, one thing I did see is a lot of open field answers. And I know if I'm going in and doing a questionnaire, if I have ABCD, I'm much more likely to do it. If it's just an open field, I might just say NA. So I guess that might be something. I do think of busy people, and even like question 11, it's pretty broad. Maybe we could look at if that could be a little, like, say, a little more specific, or have some specific answers. What are we trying to really gather? I mean, like the question was, have you had any issues with telehealth? That's pretty broad. Somebody could say, yeah, my camera sucks, or whatever. What are we trying to gather? Like, what is the purpose of that question? And could we hone it to have maybe some actual, some answers, and a field if they want to add more information. But maybe looking through those, to see it, like 12 is a yes or no, and then provide more. But is there ways that we could provide maybe some options for that to get a little more specific towards what we're trying to gather? Is that making sense?
Yep.
That's really good feedback.
Yeah, and if we do have multiple choice type things, those are nice for a report, because then we can do kind of a pie chart or something. It's just show responses. If you have an open field, you get pages of text, which is really valuable too, to hear directly from people. It's just harder to kind of see a big summary from that information. So.
Okay.
So would we want to, like, as a group, look at this more, or is that it sounds like maybe that would be helpful to, maybe if we could get a copy, and people, is that what you were saying? We could get a copy, look through it, and then maybe at our next meeting kind of discuss that a little more.
I'm comfortable with that, if that's what you'd like me to do. I could just change the language and then try to incorporate some of these comments, and then send that out ahead of the next meeting, and then we could have more discussion as far as tweaking things at that meeting. So.
That sounds good to me. Is there a general consensus among the committee members that
Sounds good to me.
David
Yeah.
will tighten it up to be specific to addictions counseling, and then send it out ahead of the next meeting?
It works.
Looks like there's a consensus.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the nice things about this is it's there's a lot of conversations about workforce and other topics now, and there's not a lot of data. And so this is an opportunity for us to also add some real data to the conversation, so we can all have more informed conversations about different things with that. So I'll bring it back to you, and we can take a look at it next time.
Okay. Moving on to new business, before we just dive right into topic A, because we have a half an hour of meeting time left, is there something specific we want to table until next meeting? And one of the topics that we really would like to get into today, or just start with A?
So the topic as far as artificial intelligence in item C, and also the description of each profession, those really aren't time sensitive. And item E, future topics for the work of the advisory committee the rest of this year and next year, that could be table 2, and we can just kind of discuss that at a future meeting. So C through E, we could probably table really easily.
Okay. So moving back to item A, ongoing, or starting discussion on a possible master's level student temporary license. Last time we had a committee meeting, we had some public comment, and there's been some initial discussion, but I think there is an item in your packet. I might be wrong. Yeah. David, could you give me a little bit more succinct background?
Sure. So I went ahead and included some public comment testimony in your packet. And that was from James Childers, basically talking about creating a student level addiction counseling license. And I think last year, some of the conversation was that there could be potentially 2 levels of temporary student licenses, one for individuals more at the bachelor's level, and then one more for people at a graduate level. Ultimately, both recommendations were forwarded to the board. Under the way that they were described, the student temporary license for the graduate level allowed for some diagnosis and treatment under supervision, but there was an issue with that, and the board had concerns that someone without a permanent license would be able to do that with a temporary student license. And so the board went ahead and made a recommendation to move forward with the version that was for more bachelor's level students that had to do with having 60 hours in a related field or with addiction courses, to have an agreement with the school and also the potential employer, and then kind of move forward with that. And since that point, that student addiction counselor temporary license has been very successful from our standpoint. I think we've had over 30 people who've been able to receive that student temporary license. It's been a nice bridge, in my opinion, from people being students in the addiction field, seeking a permanent license and being able to provide services as they are working towards that degree and then ultimately permanent license. I have heard that there are some issues with reimbursement for that level of license, and those are not currently being able to be reimbursed for things like Medicaid. That's there's different things to look at with that. As the BSRB, we really aren't involved with reimbursements. That's kind of more with the Department of Health and Environment or the Department of Aging and Disability Services. They each have a piece of the Medicaid program. We're really looking at, can we provide a path for people to practice with oversight with the license, and then that way, there's also some level of control in case people have a violation of unprofessional conduct, and we can have that process in place as well. So there are ongoing conversations regarding the reimbursement part, but at least for the bachelor's level, we've really seen a lot of people expressed interest and receive those. And I think Leslie Allen, she's the one who has been working with a lot of those applicants. Maybe she could add a comment or two about if that has been successful so far.
I believe so. I think I wasn't sure if we were going to discuss the education requirements at this committee meeting because it would require a statute change. So,
well, so I think we were going to be talking about if there should be a version that's more appropriate for the graduate level. Right now, part of the requirement for and I say it's the bachelor's level, but really it could be the same language could apply, whether it's graduate or bachelor's or graduate. You need to have 60 hours in addiction counseling coursework or a related field. Or Leslie, could you kind of comment on that in terms of the coursework requirements for the student temporary?
So I really was going to, ask a question. Because the statute, the way it was written, says 60 hours in an addiction counseling program or related field. And generally speaking, the 60 hours that someone may have obtained already are not specific to any profession. I mean, they may have a few psych classes, but most of it's general coursework. And I wasn't sure if all of those 60 hours needed to be in a program specific to addictions, or if that would, if we could adjust that, because we have people coming from different backgrounds that are peer mentors. So they've been doing things, they are involved in this, and but their degree is not, they have a bachelor's degree, but it's not in a related field. And I wondered if there was a way to adjust that language to make it more doable for people who are not from a related field.
And I think maybe the advisory committee might be looking to us for maybe some recommendations along those.
I just wondered if you were really married to the, had to be. So I was thinking if they had 60 credit hours and are currently in a program that is in addiction counseling or a related field, if that would be an appropriate change. Because you have people coming, I mean, we've had music backgrounds, but they have degrees. I mean, they have their bachelor degree and they're currently in a program working on addiction specific coursework, but they will eventually qualify for an LAC, but they cannot get the student temporary license. And so I was wondering if the language could be adjusted to allow 60 credit hours and currently in a program in addiction counseling or a related field.
I think, well, I have currently a student, LAC student working under me right now, and it's been beautiful. However, I don't know that she would do as well if she didn't at least, I think it would be an experience thing, because if they have like a music degree and they have no experience in the field, I think that it would be a lot different. Like, the girl I have right now as a student, she has gone through my program. She has worked in the facility, so she has been very familiar with the groups and all of the things. And her bachelor's is in nursing. However, she still does have some similar courses. But also, I wonder if, I don't know, I just think even myself, I'm not able to diagnose without an LCAC signing off on it. So I wonder what the difference would be. An LMAC student or an LAC student, they're still, I don't know. I guess I wonder, it's still going to be doing the same thing, maybe just working on a different level. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share a copy of the statute that speaks to this student temporary license. And this is language that was added to KSA 65-6611. This is something that was added in a bill last year. It was subbed for Senate Bill 131. But it was all this new language here in G, H, and then I. And when we're talking about the coursework, the current language here is in G1, providing documentation of completing at least 60 credit hours from an institution of higher education with an emphasis in addiction counseling or a related field, as defined by the board and rules and regulations. And so right now we're leaning on the statute for this, but potentially this could be adjusted, kind of what Leslie was saying, if we wanted to modify what's currently in there for the student temporary license as is currently in law.
I think it's helpful. And Leslie, I think I'm understanding kind of what you're saying, in that I also think there's a responsibility of agencies to use students in appropriate ways. They are students. And so being able to, I relate this to, like, as we place MSW students, they come in for our 2-year program, they may have a bachelor's degree in something that's not, social work. We allow that. And then they come in for their, yeah, me too. I didn't have my bachelor's in social work. So going into our 2-year program, they're going to have a practicum. They're going to be practicing as a student with much more supervision, like our requirements through, with that supervision, and they're learning. That's exactly why they're designated as a student, because they're learning. They're probably not going to go in and do a group all by themselves the first week, right? Like that's part of the process. And so I think, Leslie, what I'm hearing you say, so like on the letter, or I'm sorry, not letter, if that's a number one, providing the 60 hours from an institution of higher education, like being able to just say it, it's 60 hours from any, or like 60 hours from higher education, and that they would be designated, this is what this is designating them as a student within this, and that it wouldn't necessarily have to be in addictions or related field. Am I understanding that correctly, Leslie?
So like if someone was getting their LBSW, their first 60 hours, how many social work courses would they actually have in
Right.
hours?
Right.
They're
No, I mean, yeah, no.
In the first 60.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I guess I think about, as a board, again, our priority is to protect the safety of participants that are accessing care in our state, and also to look at the workforce. I mean, we definitely have workforce issues. And so a lot of this, I think, has come from that place of wanting it to find these pathways to the profession easily and not create any more barriers that don't need to be there. And I agree, Leslie. I mean, I think about, at the bachelor's level, especially if someone comes into a program, they're going to have their general eds. Those are going to be the first ones they take. They won't even get into some of those others until their junior, senior year. And that's part of why they're doing this student designation, so they can be learning in the process, that we have it very well, stated on there what kind of supervision they're going to have, and all of those things. So I mean, to me, that
all of those other safeguards in place of an
Exactly.
education plan, an attestation,
yes, yes,
a statement from the employer, a supervision plan.
exactly. And that anyone, that is working as a student, I guess the understanding of whoever took them on as a student, maybe also having, if they do have a music degree versus a social work degree, that there may be a level of a learning curve there, I guess, of learning those skills, and that may take more time. And I guess there is a certain amount of trust in employers to have that level of awareness and due diligence to make sure that their students are where they need to be. So I guess I'd be in favor of that, of shifting that to be able to allow that, because we do have all these other safeguards. I remember going through all of this a couple of years ago, and being able to talk through all these. We spent a lot of time on this to make sure that we kind of had enough of those guardrails in place to provide a really good environment so that people could go ahead and get this student designee, because it did come back to some billing and some other things. I think we discussed that as having an implication there. So yeah, I guess I would be in favor of maybe allowing that, and having that. And so just to clarify too, David, so this is the regulation, not the statute. We wouldn't have to change the statute if we changed.
This is the statute itself. So
This is a statute. Okay, so this would take a statute change.
It would.
Okay, but that could be a recommendation.
I was thinking that you guys could talk about it because you were talking about the master's student temp. So if you were going to open the statute anyway, that might
gotcha.
To look at.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Leslie. I think that makes sense too, because that's a much bigger process, larger process to go through statute. So, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what others think.
That makes sense to me. I agree. So just to clarify, or for me, if we changed it to 60 hours, not necessarily in a related field, it could apply more broadly as a student temporary license.
Yes. So, for example, we had a person who had a degree in respiratory care that is considered a related field. And she was going to, Fort Hays has a certification program specifically for student temps in sociology and addiction counseling. And so people go there to get their coursework. So if the statute said 60 hours and currently enrolled in a program in addiction, or, you know, with a focus in addiction counseling or a related field, that would allow some people that we have not been able to include. And then, you know, like the person that had a respiratory degree, once she transferred in her coursework into the sociology program, she had 60 hours in a related field. So it just kind of, it doesn't make sense that, you know what I mean, that it would make more sense that they just be allowed to do that rather than getting a second degree or, you know.
And I think it more closely aligns with, again, at the LMAC level or like at the master's level, kind of aligns with how that is looked at. And then just saying like at the bachelor's level, coming in as a student, kind of at that LAC level, but they are enrolled in that program currently. Right. So they're getting that instruction, they're getting those skills, they're a student. So yeah, I would strongly support that.
So do we feel comfortable taking this back to the board and making a recommendation?
Is there anything we're missing? Does anybody, I mean, is there a reason that this wouldn't make sense, or that I don't want to also overlook anything if there's something I'm not thinking of?
Well, after talking to at first I was like, I don't know, but I think that it's going to be up to each agency anyways, so like, I'm going to know, okay, I don't think she has near enough experience, so I'm not going to agree to supervise her. But I wouldn't want to exclude anyone who potentially does have that experience, you know, at like Leslie said, as a peer mentor, or has been, you know, in working as a monitor or something like that. So after talking more through it, I think I would be fine. I support it, because at the end of the day, it's going to be up to the agency who they want to supervise. So I think that's good.
David, does that seem like a reasonable recommendation by the committee?
I think so. And this is all still focused at kind of the bachelor's level coursework. I believe so.
Okay.
That's what I'm picking up. Okay. Yeah, I think we could quantify that.
Okay. So that still doesn't answer the question of the student master's temporary.
Yeah, and there's different ways to approach that. One item I've talked with Leslie about is kind of just the general difference in hours between a master's program versus a bachelor's program. Because we did talk about like the language of the statute. It doesn't necessarily say that it could only relate to an undergraduate level, but by the time that somebody got 60 hours, they're probably done with their master's program or close to it. And so one thing that we were thinking of potentially is if you had similar language for a master's program, but since the time frame is likely cut in half to 60 hours, you could have the hours cut in half. So instead of having 60 hours with the emphasis, you could have 30 hours of graduate level courses with the emphasis. So that way, if someone was 1 year into a 2-year program, they would be able to use it. You could, if you wanted to pursue something like that, you could have the license last for 1 year instead of 2 years, or, you know, there may be no harm in having it last 2 years if someone is, let's say, working somewhere else while taking those classes, or there's another reason why they're taking the classes at a kind of a slower pace. So, but that is an option that we did talk about, is that if you wanted to have it relate to the graduate level programs too, you could decrease the hours, but make those 30 hours specific to graduate level coursework.
We also discussed, and this would be helpful for the social workers, if you're in a master's program, how much coursework do you have to do before you do a practicum?
It depends.
In our program, you come in, if you're in the 2-year program, you start your practicum in fall with your classes. So you don't have classes yet. You start it right away. For the advanced standing, if you already
Immediately.
have,
Yeah.
I mean, they have summer classes, but then they start fall immediately. So they've had maybe 3 to 6 hours. And that's the other thing, just the hours. Ours is 9 hours a semester. So you know, you'd only have, after a whole year, you'd have 18, well, plus the summer classes for the advanced standing. But the 2-year program, after a year, you'd only have 18 hours of coursework, 9 hours. No, wait, that's not right. 9 hours of coursework, and then you have your practicum, which is the other 7. So you're right. So 15, yeah.
The advanced
But
is
to
less-
go back, what's that?
advanced standing is just around 30 hours, isn't it? 36 maybe.
Right. So you have, and I'm sorry, so 9 hours is coursework, like your actual classes, and then the other is for your practicum. I've been out of the advising too long now. I'm trying. It's 5 or 7 that you get for your practicum hours. But to get back to the original question, you start practicum with your classes. So
Yeah.
you know, it's not like they've had,
So
and
30
it.
hours wouldn't work for social work,
Mhm.
master's social work
Yeah.
student.
Yeah, and I'm not as familiar with other disciplines, but yeah. And I'll find the numbers. I'll get that real.
Dave, do we have the language from when they first looked at this? I don't know where, I know we have it, but I don't know where it is.
Yeah.
A master's student temp, I mean, because they did a lot of work, so it could be.
It's true. Yeah, I will see if I can find sort of a short summary of that. And while I'm looking for that, maybe we could talk about the next item on the new business agenda since we're running a little short
Sure.
on time. So I'll dig into that, but I did want to bring to the advisory committee. There have been some conversations recently, again focused on workforce and thinking about ways of practicing as an alternative to traditional licensure. As you are aware, when addiction counseling became licensed, there was initially a bachelor's and a clinical level, and then later a master's level. But prior to licensure, there was certification, and many years ago, you know, under SRS, there were other different types of formats. I know there was something that was called an unlicensed practitioner, or, you know, things like that in the past. There has been some conversations that I have heard where people might have some interest in exploring those again. And I wanted to bring that to the advisory committee to see if you had any thoughts. If some of you were knowledgeable about some of how that worked under SRS many years in the past, or if you had any thoughts on how licensure compares to that type of a format. From my perspective, just being here in the last few years, it seems like having licensure provides levels of oversight that weren't provided previously in terms of protecting the public. But I did want to let you know that I have been hearing those conversations and wanted to just get thoughts from advisory committee members. I know workforce challenges are important, and it's important to have good conversations and explore creative measures. But I wanted to kind of get some feedback from you in terms of, you know, if there would if people at the state level might be having conversations about that, if you had any thoughts on those past models and how they compare to licensure right now. And Jill, I was trying to describe that and frame that conversation in a helpful way. But I'm hopeful. If you have questions about that, I'm just trying to, we're putting a lot of things out there on the table, trying to think creatively. And so that is one thing people have talked about. I just kind of wanted to see if you had any thoughts, just kind of bringing it back to you now. So.
I think if we work to endeavor to open the student temporary addictions counselor license a little bit more with the 60 hours like we were talking about, and then work to create a master's level student license that provides, I hope, some more workforce without muddying the waters of a like non-licensed provider under another agency. It seems very confusing, and I was thinking last night about that our responsibility is to protect the public and address workforce and protect. It feels really concerning that licensure and oversight would move out of the BSRB and potentially under another state agency for addictions counseling of any kind. But that's just I mean, I started in addictions counseling when we were still certified and not licensed. So I don't know what other people think.
I don't know that and maybe I'm just maybe needing just a little more information. Like,
It's confusing.
okay.
Yeah, so I think basically in an effort to I think right now there's a lot of companies that are having difficulty filling positions, specifically lower level type positions. And I think in an effort to think creatively and how can we have more people available to fill some of those positions, some people are looking at models from other states or past models that were here before licensure. And some of those models might include things like allowing people to practice without having them be licensed. And you know, for some states that don't have licensure, it's a different, it's not comparing apples to apples. I think that's what making some of this conversation a little bit tricky. Because some states have certification, some states have licensure, some states have a different terminology and name. And so we just want to give the advisory committee a little chance to kind of have some comments. If you have thoughts on just what we're hearing, we haven't seen a real structured proposal here for Kansas. It's just some states are kind of being highlighted and saying, well, this state has this state has this, but nothing concrete yet for what Kansas could consider. So.
Okay, I mean, that helps, David. And I think for me, this goes back to, I guess, thinking about how we see individuals who have substance use disorders, how we're providing treatment for those individuals or for any addiction. That to me, having a standard of competence also highlights that they deserve good quality care. I guess I think about other disorders like, you know, diabetes, cancer. We require a certain amount of licensure and competence in order to treat those individuals. And I think obviously I am a huge proponent for workforce development and allowing as many qualified, competent individuals into the field to try and help deal with the issues that we're facing. I don't know that lowering standards, I felt kind of that Kansas has been progressive in recognizing that we need to make sure that we are safeguarding the treatment systems that we have, you know, that we can for those individuals accessing care. I want to have the most, competent individuals to provide that care, including individuals with lived experience. They're part of that treatment team. We've expanded that role and said this is a role that's important. And we know the evidence and the research behind that. Also recognizing that when we're providing interventions, we need to have individuals that know how to have fidelity to evidence-based approaches, understand the nuances, the skills needed to help people make change in their life. And so I guess my thought is it is a slippery slope. We have to be careful. And I do think that we've spent, in the time that I've been a part of this committee, a large amount of time talking about how can we provide some flexibility so we can provide good care and allow individuals kind of that pathway forward to be part of a treatment team, and also maintaining that we want to have a standard of care just like we would for any other disorder. And so yeah, I think again, if there's nothing really being proposed concretely, but just in general, I think we've moved forward. I look at that having practiced in other states where maybe individuals weren't as versed, in certain areas. And I don't know if that affected the care, but we want to make sure that we're talking about a vulnerable population. We're talking about, individuals where I think the stigma and the shame that they feel coming in and accessing care is still a huge barrier. And we don't want to create other barriers again with individuals that maybe aren't versed in appropriate interventions and treatment.
I completely agree, Christina. I think that there's a reason we went to bachelor level licensure because, we have people and I grandfathered in as well, but I can, I mean, I just think that, yeah, we don't want to go backwards because there's definitely can be more harm than good caused with our clients. I mean, I think that, yeah, I think that we're progressive. I think we're, even opening up to students is great, but I don't think we should get into a place where we're moving backwards with because that's why we came up with the peer mentorship and those types of things. And I think that, opening them up to work in the field, then they also still have to gain a level of professionalism and ethics and things like that. Whereas if I don't know, I think that we're moving in the right direction. And though I understand the workforce and agencies needing staff to fill these counselor positions, but we also have to think about how, yes, vulnerable the population is that we serve and how much more harm can be done than good if we just are looking at workforce. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Christine. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I mean, just the last thought I have on this is, again, even when we look at behavioral health as the umbrella that I always kind of use for mental health and substance use disorders, I mean, we require a certain level when we talk about mental health, right? And there's still a little bit of a difference in levels of provider care that we've allowed under substance use disorders, which, again, not saying that that's incorrect in doing that. I mean, we've established that, and I think there's good evidence to support having individuals, a large treatment team, being able to address the needs of clients, participants, and patients. But I agree, Charity. I mean, I think, in looking at where we've come and being very deliberate about that. David, when you said non-licensed, I immediately, like, my inner voice was like, oh. We have to be so careful about that. And again, would we even be talking about this with other diseases, with other disorders, that wouldn't be something that would be discussed, because we know that you have to have a certain proficiency and competence. So yeah, I don't know what you're saying.
I'm gonna burst in here because I have a client at noon. So
I have a meeting as well.
I need to go. So can we table this discussion for the next meeting?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, because there's a lot of complexity. David, you said you told me yesterday or the day before or whenever that you would be willing to send out a poll for the December meeting.
Yes.
So that would be fantastic. So the next meeting's in December. David will send you an email with a poll for the date. Thank you, everyone, for your time today and a robust discussion. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second.
All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Those opposed, same sign. All right, the meeting is adjourned.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Dave. I found something in the board packets.
I